Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our Fall 2022 Dragonfly Cafe. Joining us today is Dr. Kayla Cranston, who will be giving her talk on co-designing conservation with, not for. During this talk, you're welcome to put your questions in the chat. You're also welcome to use the raise hand functionality here at Zoom to also unmute and share. But we are also going to have a Q&A style at the end. So you're also welcome to wait until the end to ask any lingering questions here. And I will pass it on to Dr. Cranston.
Thank you, Manuela. And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited, and a special thanks to Kate Clemens, one of my doctoral students here who connected us all. I've heard so many amazing things about the Dragonfly program, so I'm very excited to be presenting tonight. And again, like you said, we're going to be talking about co-designing conservation with and not for communities. I do want to, yay, Kate. All right, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay with everyone, and we'll get started. Again, as Manuela said, if you have any questions, please just let us know. And somebody's going to tell me that there are questions so that I can answer them. I'm hoping that I won't just be staring at my slideshow. Okay, so somebody's going to tell me, right? Right. Okay. Yeah. Verbal is usually the best. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Alrighty, so hi everyone. I am Kayla Cranston, and I am working at Antioch University, New England, which, as we were talking earlier, is Southern New Hampshire. So that's where I am right now. And there I am the Director of Co-Design Science and Innovation in the Environmental Studies Department at Antioch University, New England. And the picture that you see in front of you is an example of something that I did prior to coming back to Antioch. Antioch University, New England is also where I got my doctorate degree, working with Carol Saunders, who is the co-founder of conservation psychology. And so after I got my doctorate, I went off and did a postdoc over at Oregon State University, working with some marine communities over there that were right off the coast of Oregon. And then I spent some time at the St. Louis Zoo in Missouri. And that is where the picture is from that you see yourself or see in front of you right now. So while I was there, I was able to kind of apply some of my dissertation work. And so what I want to talk to you all today about is what I learned in that long process of getting the doctorate and then applying it in the real world, a couple of different areas and a couple of different situations, and getting to the place where it turns out a lot of the things that the social justice world has told us are required for equity and ethics, ethically engaging individuals, really are also the best thing that you can do for conservation. And so we're going to talk about that today, fostering durable, equitable engagement for conservation and social justice, because it turns out both things really do go well together. And quite honestly, having conservation without social justice doesn't take you very far. And so we're going to talk about that today and why that is and what the science is behind exactly why that is. So like I may have mentioned, my background's in psychology. I studied social and behavioral psychology at Arizona State as an undergraduate and got my master's applying that science to a sustainable community development plan in my master's before I went on to get my doctorate, where I pretty much rolled it all up and applied it to a bunch of different communities and tried to see what it looked like on the other end. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Okay. So how to engage communities for long-term impact and conservation. Let me tell you, I know a lot of you are in your graduate studies now, or perhaps have done them and you now work at different zoos and aquariums or different conservation organizations. You are the people that I worked with in my dissertation. So what we were realizing was I worked with an organization called Human Wildlife Conflict Collaborations, what it used to be called. It's now called Center for Conservation Peace Building. And they used to work in North America as well as in different areas across the world. And I also worked with the Regional Network for Conservation Educators in the Albertine Rift and the Tropical Biology Association. So the thing you need to know about these organizations is that they, like us, really wanted to see how they could build the most capacity to have conservation continue on over the years without necessarily having a lot of outside input, right? So how do we engage the communities that are on the ground so that this longer term impact can be had on conservation? And so that was the question that they were asking. They were putting together a lot of trainings, a lot of activities, a lot of engagement, a lot of campaigns. And what they were finding was that while there was change being made right away, there was also a situation where they go back 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, and that change would not be there anymore. Either the people who were trained had left, or the change that they had made was being used a little differently than they had originally expected. And so the question is, how do we do it better? How do we engage communities to create this long-term impact for conservation by way of human behavior, right? And so that was what excited me. That was my dissertation question. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the results that came out of that research and how I've applied them in different contexts since then. So I think what's important to note, and I'm going to skip around my slides because I did this a little differently last time. So what I think is important to note is that it wasn't just the folks in my dissertation that were having this issue, right? I also at the time was working for an organization, well, I was working at Antioch at the Conservation Psychology Institute, which used to run a bunch of in-person trainings. And one of the individuals that was there when I was running the show over there came from a very large conservation organization across the other side of the United States, and was asking me, I'm trying very hard to create behavior change. And what I'm learning is that it's really difficult to do that, to create behavior change towards conservation goals. And they were not kidding. It absolutely is. And so this woman told me this wonderful story of that I now call the lesson of the corn doll, where she just wasn't fully understanding. She worked in a place in Brazil, right? And they were trying to get the individuals in Brazil to find a different way to create sustainable livelihoods than to take wood from this forest that needed to be protected, right? So how can we help these individuals have a more economically sustainable future without taking wood from this specific area? And so she said, I came in and I did what had worked at another site. And what worked at another site is that they created these little corn dolls. It was little dolls, as you can see here, that were made out of the husks of corn. And so, as many of you might be catching on right now, it did not work in the rainforest of Brazil. And the question she had was why? And she was being very sincere. And I think the first thing that I said to her was, you have to understand that you are not the only person that has ever asked a question like this. It's a very common question we get. And the answer is, the reality is there's a lot of different reasons why trying to put forth a solution for a problem in one area of the world that came from another area of the world. Just because it worked there doesn't mean it's going to work here for a million reasons, which I'm sure you can immediately recognize, the first being practical. Do they even have corn there in Brazil? Like, what's happening in Brazil that makes you think that corn dolls are going to be a good idea? Economic, political, not least of which is cultural, and of course, psychological. So culturally, a lot of other people could speak to that a little bit better than I could. Today, we're going to talk about the psychological reasons why that doesn't work and why something called co-design is one way that we could move away from this pattern of attempting to copy and paste solutions from one conservation project to another. These things are things that are being picked up on by many of the funding organizations that we work with and accreditation organizations that we work with. I recently was working with Association of Zoos and Aquariums on their Safe Pact work and doing co-design with individuals who are working in their SAFE programs. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But really what it comes down to is the psychological. And so we'll go into that real quick. So I think what is true is that for decades now, gosh, over many, many decades, there has been this traditional approach to conservation, which I now call the carrot or the stick method. And the carrot or stick method really does suggest a combination of rewards and penalties to motivate humans, right? So the carrot refers to incentives like financial or social. Corn doll is in there somewhere, right? It's an incentive to create these things that you can then sell for money. The stick, of course, refers to those penalties. So if you do this behavior that we'd like you not to do, you will get either a fine or you will go to jail. And that's the stick, right? So this carrot or stick method is something that I've seen a lot of in national and international conservation organizations. It's a traditional behavior change method. And when it's used alone, what comes up over and over and over again is that it creates this short-term or perhaps unpredictable engagement, right? Because think about it from their perspective. What happens if you're going on about your way and somebody asks you to do something that you weren't, or that isn't a part of your culture, you don't have the practical means to do, but they're giving you these things and they're saying, we'll give you money for it, or look, all your friends are doing it. The minute that things change, the minute that things are the financial incentives aren't there, or the penalties aren't there, the behavior goes back to baseline. Right. And so the question is, what's the alternative? And I want to just start again. I'm sorry about the slides. Start with something that I quoted in my dissertation and also in a recent paper that I wrote with a lot of colleagues about co-design, but was originally said by these cognitive anthropologists. And that is that conservation professionals need to redefine their role as leaders of environmental work and instead strengthen their capacity to act as facilitators of participatory processes that support the co-design of conservation with and not for the communities that are impacted by their efforts. Now, I want you to take a look at this down here, this date. So that was first said in 2002 by this couple of authors here. And it's been said multiple times, even before then, since the 70s, I believe, right? So this is not a new concept. What is new instead is that now we have science to prove that this is true. And what I want to do today is show you a little bit about what that science looks like. Okay, so we've talked about why it's not going to work. And we will go back up to this, right? So these are the results, right? Not to bury the lead here, but these are the results from my dissertation work. I call them the 5 psychological factors of sustained engagement. And essentially what they are is the missing link between wanting to educate, right? Or wanting to add penalties or social or financial incentives, and wanting to have that be more of an external motivation to move forward with conservation action. And these are the 5 psychological factors that were shown in my research to predict the longest term change, the longest term capacity to essentially apply skills towards conservation over time. And we're going to go through today what each of these means, so don't worry about that. But before we do, I think I just want to give a little bit of a, is it going to work? Okay, hold on. A little into some of the work that I've done recently with the WWF here in the United States, applying a co-design model that really does use these 5 factors to guide the engagement efforts that they are doing. So we're just here. Okay. Ready?
And preserve the prairie dog and
Are we
black-footed ferret.
Good.
Black-footed ferrets are in trouble because they are what we call an obligate predator. They only eat prairie dogs and they only live on prairie dog colonies.
Prairie dogs serve as a keystone species, providing food, shelter, and habitat for many other species. Black-footed ferrets are a really unique species, but they're also one that faces a lot of challenges because of the immense amount of habitat that they require. The second really big threat to the persistence of black-footed ferrets is the non-native disease, sylvatic plague, which really threatens black-footed ferrets both directly and also indirectly because it can decimate prairie dog populations.
At one time, prior to around 2009, we had a total of over 10,000 acre plus of prairie dog colonies on Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Around 2009, sylvatic plague entered the prairie dog colony over a period of 2 years or more.
Blackfooted ferret recovery cannot be achieved without the inclusion of Native nations, as they have some of the best remaining intact habitat for black-footed ferrets. I had seen a webinar by Kayla that she presented with a colleague on the 5 principles of co-designing conservation with and not for the community.
During this time, I don't know about you, but it's become really, really clear to me, if it wasn't before, that conservation of biodiversity is absolutely inextricably linked to human well-being.
The coaching process enabled us to take some of these instinctual skills of working with people into a framework in which to collect the right information from individuals in the community in the right way at the right time and be able to collate that in a form that then can be included into the conservation plan.
Christy and her team were incredibly motivated to get this done, not just quickly, but done right.
Through our weekly meetings with Jessica, Noel, and Christy, we have developed a template that has allowed us to commit an outreach program to the community, to the stakeholders that are all involved. That's including livestock operators on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation that will be coexisting with the prairie dogs and black-footed ferrets.
I think that in the last year, having that opportunity to build close working relationships has been a really positive thing.
Okay, so that was just a few words from a group that I've been working with, gosh, since the beginning, since right in the beginning of COVID. I'll put these. Okay. Can you guys hear me again?
Yeah.
I have dogs in the background, so we wouldn't want them to go crazy if somebody else's dogs start. You understand. You've been working from home for multiple years like the rest of us. Okay, I'm gonna stop. That was a duck, and I appreciate that. Very good. All right, so we are gonna go into the details of what these 5 factors are and how they help us to really move forward with this type of equitable engagement towards conservation. But before I do that, I just want to pause here and I want to take a pulse check. And how are we doing? Do we have any questions about how we got to this part?
Nothing in the chat. I
Okay,
don't know
good.
if anybody wants to share by unmuting.
I talk quickly sometimes, so I just want to make sure everybody's
It all made sense.
okay. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Okay, great. All right, now we're going to get into the science part. So again, you can read all about what I'm about to talk about if you would like. It is just been published in Zoo Biology under the Conservation Psychology special issue that I co-edited with Kathleen Cahill. There is the reference if you're interested in it, and Kate can probably pop that into the chat as well. So essentially, we've talked about this and why co-design perhaps is a better approach than what this carrot or stick method might bring us. And here it is for all of you to feast your eyes upon. So the co-design method, what the heck is it and how does it follow the 5 factors? So the co-design method is essentially a 4-phased approach to really, instead of creating programming or creating opportunities or creating any type of projects or initiatives for the community, when it comes to conservation, we're doing it with them instead. And the first phase that we go to is making sure that we know who the heck is supposed to be in the room when we are co-designing with the communities. What does it mean, right? You can define communities in a lot of different ways. So our first phase is identifying and analyzing stakeholders with the communities who are directly impacted by the potential programming, opportunities, initiatives, whatever it is that you are attempting to co-design. I work with, like WWF, right? They are going to co-design a Blackfooted Ferret conservation plan with the individuals who are living on this reservation in Montana, right? And so individuals directly impacted by the project are those landowners that the gentleman was talking about in the clip, those professionals who serve the individuals who are directly impacted by the project, community leaders, and of course, WWF's own organization, executives, managers, and staff. And I use WWF as an example, but Kate and I are also working with many zoos right now that are actually taking this journey with us as well. And at the end, we can tell you a little bit more about how that's working, and they are doing it directly with their surrounding communities. So currently we're working with Cleveland Metro Park Zoo, Zoo New England. We just finished up working with Woodland Park Zoo, actually, with AR Lopez is the person that we were working with over there. And we are now picking up Roger Williams Park Zoo, working with Shereen Knowlton, as well as Detroit Zoo, working with Shafkat. So we're kind of hitting it hard, right? And the first move across all of those different sites is identifying your stakeholders. Who is supposed to be in the room? And what I find interesting is that with the co-design process, there's a couple of things that are different than your normal approach. And those things include, just in this first phase alone, identifying yourself as a stakeholder, right? So when a lot of people start thinking about how are we going to work with the community and bring equity and bring them to the table, doesn't that mean that I have to abdicate my place at the table? And the answer is absolutely not. And if you think that is the way that you're going to do things, first of all, your boss is not going to like that too much, but it's also not going to really work, right? Because the reality of the fact is that you do have a stake in this process. And it's important to name that. It's important to realize that you yourself, regardless of how much the intent is there to get the community involved and have their voices heard, you are not we as conservation organizations, right? We are not these kind of objective facilitators, right? We have a stake in this as well. And so the question is, how quickly can we acknowledge that and put ourselves at the table as well? The other thing that I've noticed that's a little different than traditional engagement methods that I've seen is that essentially a lot of engagement methods I have seen focus on these middle 2 circles, right? Other professionals that work with the individuals who live in the communities or who are going to be directly impacted by our programs. It's easy, not easy, but it's easier to talk with individuals who perhaps have a similar education level as we do, or a similar life experience as we do, but perhaps less easy is really connecting with these population, especially at these zoos that I work with. The urban populations that live in and around the zoo, or not in, but around the zoo, definitely are not populations that the zoo is incredibly skilled at engaging in most cases. So they might come through the doors, but when you look at the rosters of the individuals who are engaging in their programming, educational programming, conservation programming, heck, even employment opportunities, those demographics do not match often the demographics of the individuals who live directly around their zoo. The individuals who perhaps could be directly impacted by these projects because they're right there, right out the front door, are not being engaged at the level that they could. In fact, they've been historically excluded from the process. And so the question is, how do we get there? Well, the first step is identifying that these individuals exist and that their voices are important for this process to work. The analysis piece that we have here speaks to how we want to identify the interest, the availability, the power dynamics, and the influence of these different types of stakeholders so that we can make best choices to put them in rooms together or not, or go directly to them instead of asking them to come to us in different ways, making sure that we are navigating the power dynamics that are inherent when you are approaching historically excluded communities. And that is what helps us. That analysis is what helps us to prepare for phases B, C, and D. So phase B here is identifying the assets that already exist in the community. This Dragonflyers is similar to appreciative inquiry that I've heard many times you all use. So we are not coming from a needs-based perspective. I ask my sites that I work with to never say the word needs assessment ever to me, ever. And one of the reasons is not because the outcomes of what has historically been known as a needs assessment is necessarily bad, right? It's important. And if you take an asset-based approach to community engagement, you will essentially, with CoDesign method that we have here, you will come across the same information, right? But if you go into a historically excluded community, it is the quickest way to shut down conversation, to begin asking about what do they lack, what do they need, where are the gaps, what are the barriers. You know, the reality is that individuals like myself and many of you here today who have privilege, sure, we want to be asked those questions. Ask me about my barriers, ask me about my deficits. I want to tell you so you can help me, right? However, when you are in a historically excluded community, that's what you've been asked your entire life, right? And so for you to be asked it again and again and again is the quickest way, in my experience, to shut down conversation with these communities that we want to.
We have a quick question related to the phases. So the question is, in phase A, have you noticed a major change getting stakeholders to the table?
A change.
Challenge, sorry, a major challenge getting stakeholders to the table.
Absolutely. And the challenge usually is with the individuals at the conservation organizations that I'm working with. And what I mean by that is that experience shows that when the reality is that the individuals at the conservation organizations have had decades often of attempting to engage individuals who come to them easily, it is very difficult to help them understand that even when they say things, and perhaps even the mission of their organization is that we are for everyone, we are for all, why won't they come? You have to make the effort to go outside of what you would normally do to engage individuals in the community if who you want to show up at the table are people who normally don't show up. So things like providing an incentive for them to be there, providing transportation for them to show up, and providing childcare is another thing that I have found to work. And you have to make sure that you're going to them in most cases. And in fact, in many cases, especially at the very beginning, when what you're trying to do is relationship building. So what I've noticed is that people try to jump across this relationship building barrier and go straight to this and just start asking people to come to focus groups, do a survey, do this, do that. And the reality is that is another quick way to shut down conversation. We want this bidirectional conversation to happen, and the quickest way to do that is to acknowledge what we haven't been doing to get people to the table, and then instead go to their table first, right? So make time, make effort, build your capacity and allow time for going to community meetings, for going to their, what they find to be important first, before asking them to come to you and help you with the co-design of your initiatives. It's a really good question. Anything else?
I think we're good.
Okay, cool. So once you have done that, and I'm really grateful that we paused there because it's an important piece. So Amy, thank you very much for your question. Because what I get really excited talking about how phase A moves into phase B, but the reality is this piece right here where you are relationship building is absolutely 100% essential. And I do teach a course on this, on how to do it. We break it down over 9 sessions, not 9 class sessions. So if you're interested in that, let me know at the end. I'll be happy to send you a link to check out that course. And in doing so, I have an entire week where this is all we talk about. That's all we're talking about. It's how do you develop relationships? How do you begin reaching out? How do you know who to reach out to first? What's the prioritization? How do we categorize the stakeholders? Yada, yada, yada. It's all very important before you get to this place where you are identifying assets in the community that already exist so that you can build upon them with your own programming. That's what you're doing in the green circle. That's what you're doing in phase B. And you do that through a series of focus group surveys, listening sessions, participatory asset mapping sessions in the co-design model. That is how we do it. And in the course, as well as the coaching and the implementation projects that we're working on with the zoos, we take them through that process. And the idea is at the end of that, there are 2 types of programs that come out of the other end of this usually. One is the type of programming that is relevant and useful and important to the community. And the organization already offers it. It's just not known by the community yet. So that's important to know. And then the other kind is, of course, new programming that the organization wouldn't have even thought of to begin with, right? And so that's important. Then we go into a phase of strategic planning and pilot testing. All the while, right? If you are you've got a biology background or something, conservation background, you might recognize this piece right here as almost like a adaptive management approach to things. The one thing that it really does, how it differs from that is that the entire time we are monitoring and reflecting back to the community, where we're at, what we're up to, how we're doing it, so that, you know, we're not in a black box. We're not just going to come out the other end of it and say, thanks for all your input in phase B. Now we're at the end of phase D, and this is what we came up with. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen instead is that we are going to use the funding that is available to hire people from the community to help us spread the word about this and show us how. What is the best method to communicate to your fellow neighbors about this process while we're doing it, right? I work with communities between 70 and 350,000 people. And so we have some AmeriCorps funding that we help the organizations that we work with get to hire individuals from the community to help us with this. And if you're planning on doing it yourself, I would strongly suggest you either take the course or talk to us briefly before you get started, because the budget on something like this with bigger communities is very real. And it's highly underestimated by the higher ups that I have spoken with at large conservation organizations in the past. So, okay, I'm gonna move on now. Any other questions about co-design? We're gonna be going through it at the end anyway, but where am I at with time? How much more time do I have? I don't want to go over here.
You have about 20-ish minutes, give or take.
Okay. So we will go into the science piece right now, right? This is the practical piece that really works. And throughout this entire thing, there are a million things that could go wrong. And so the question is, how the heck do we know that we're doing it right? How do we guide our work while we are engaging with the community in this co-design way? And the answer is the 5 factors, right? These are the factors that I showed you earlier that really help us to identify how to create that long-term change, that long-term sustained engagement, if you will. And so we're going to go through those now and what each of them means so that you have a sense. Each of the pictures that you'll see as I'm going through this are different communities that I've worked with. This one is a group of individuals, the regional network that I was talking about earlier, across 5 different countries in East Africa, and they taught me the most I know about cross-cultural indicators of this longer term change. Personal and professional meaning, right? So something I call meaningful ownership is the first of the 5 factors. Meaningful ownerships means that the people that are involved in your co-design process, if that's what you're up to, feel that what they are doing with you is personally or professionally meaningful, right? So this is the opposite of some citizen science approaches that I've seen where we are teaching individuals or even really capacity building projects that I've seen in foreign countries where it's, you know, let's teach them how to take samples of water so that we can collect data for our projects. And that data for the projects is incredibly important. And if that's what your aim is, then great. However, if what you're also planning to do or trying to do is create this sustained engagement, you might want to find something that's a little bit more personally or professionally meaningful to ask the community to do. So that is what meaningful ownership is. It's incredibly important. Anybody who's a seasoned professional out there and done community engagement can probably pick up on this one right away. It's relatively obvious that this is something that's required. The other one that's relatively obvious is something I call effective autonomy. And these pictures you see in front of you are from when I worked when I was staff at the St. Louis Zoo, and I was working to co-create educational programming in North St. Louis County for a new campus that the St. Louis Zoo was just creating out there. And so effective autonomy basically means I did it, I got this, I do not need an expert over my shoulder. And so really the reality here is that if you are trying to do work in the community, you don't want to be having to shape their every single move, right? These pictures are of Quentin, Julia, Daria, and David. These are the AmeriCorps members that we hired from the community, born and raised, who helped us to develop strategies in the community. And so we were hoping to develop effective autonomy in them as well as their fellow neighbors, their fellow community members. And that is what effective autonomy is I did it, I got this, I can do this without somebody kind of shaping and guiding my every move. So like I said before, if you're a seasoned professional, these 2, effective autonomy and meaningful ownership, probably come pretty naturally to you. Not least of which is because if you don't have them, it usually doesn't go very far, right? If something is not meaningful and also people feel like they need to be told what to do it, they're not going to do it for very long. And that's pretty clear right off the bat. However, these last 3 that I'll talk about are some of the 3 that when I talk to even the most seasoned professional, it's difficult to really foster, right? And sometimes even difficult to understand. So let's go through them now. The first one, and in my opinion, the most important one, is something that I call explicit community demand. Okay, so this statement up here, my neighbors have told me that this is good for our community. It literally is how we measure whether or not someone has community demand, is whether or not they can say this and agree strongly with this statement. So what you're looking for is to create a project, to co-create a project with your community where the people in the residents in the community have literally been told by their colleagues or their neighbors that what they are doing in partnership with your organization is literally good for the well-being of their community. It's a really high bar. It's a really high bar, guys. It really, really is. And the reality is that if you move forward and you know that that bar is there, there's a reason that it's there. It's not just because we like to torture y'all. It's because the science shows that if you don't have it, that long-term change is not going to stick around for very long, right? So the other ones other than community demand are group efficacy. And so this is my team, as you can see in the middle, working there at St. Louis Zoo. That the feeling is we've got this, right? And so we want to be a part of a team that I can imagine all of us have been a part of the opposite of this, where it's like, I feel like I'm doing a good job, but this person over here is really screwing things up for us. And as a group, we are not effective, right? That's the opposite of group efficacy. We want to develop the opposite of that, which is, I feel like as a group, we are doing great. The quickest way to reduce this is to ask a community for information, for their input, for let's just do a survey, guys. It's just like gathering information, and then not immediately telling them how you're going to use that information. And shortly thereafter, after the analysis of the data, going back to them and telling them exactly how their information that they gave, their input, shaped the next steps of your project, right? If you can do that, you are fostering group efficacy. If you don't do that, if you get information and just kind of take off and don't ever go back to them telling them what happened with it, it's the quickest way to tank group efficacy that I have found to date. So this is really, really important for that longer term change. Last, but certainly not least, is the self-regulated understanding. So if I know anything about environmental educators, I know that there's a very, very strong belief that if we tell them, if we educate them, right, then they'll just, if they knew what we knew, they would behave like we would behave. And the reality is that's not necessarily true. Education does not necessarily, knowledge does not necessarily lead to action. And so the question is always, how much knowledge is necessary? And with self-regulated understanding, we have one answer to that, that leads to longer term change, which is the level of understanding where you can identify and correct your own mistakes. So these individuals, as you see in front of you, are a picture from my time at St. Louis Zoo doing the participatory asset mapping sessions. And at this time, this had been about a year into our community engagement efforts. These individuals were asked to help us identify organizations in their community that could help us better our programming. And so we were developing this self-regulated understanding where they knew enough about the project that they could tell us the next step that might be useful. And if they didn't know, they could correct their own mistakes. They knew who to ask if they had questions, right? That's one of the biggest indicators. So that's self-regulated understanding. And together, they create the 5 factors of sustained conservation partnerships or sustained engagement. How do we know if we're doing this well? The good news is that that was part of the research I was doing, was how do we measure for this? And so what you see in front of you are the questions that you could put on a survey, the Likert scale, 1 to 5, 1 being I strongly disagree, 5 being I absolutely agree. And our goal is to hit a 5 out of 5 on this. So the reality is that that is very difficult to do often. And we have found that even after a year of co-designing with these 5 factors as your guideposts, it is difficult to get there. And so you just keep working at it, right? And you have the material in front of you that tells you which of the 5 factors you want to continue to work on and which you need to strengthen the most. And so that is what we work with organizations to do here at Antioch at the Conservation Psychology Institute. If any of you are interested in working with us, I strongly encourage you to get a hold of us. If you're interested in doing a doctorate with us like Kate has, there is the name and email address of our admissions counselor who knows all about us and is happy to talk with you about the options. If you are from an organization and you have you and a couple partners who want to go through the coaching service like WWF did to learn all about how you might be able to apply this at your organization in the real world, please let us know. We have a couple of spaces for November. And then, of course, you can learn more by taking the co-design course that we have at University of California, San Diego. As always, there's my contact information. I'm going to stop sharing now. Is there anything I'm missing, Kate, we wanted to mention? Yeah, I think that's about it. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. thank you all so much for sticking with me there. I know it's a lot of information, but I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. If you all want to unmute and give Dr. Cranston a round of applause, you can also do it in the reaction.
Oh, you guys are so sweet. Thank you.
Feel free. All right. Sorry, I was managing a dog who wanted in my lap, but he is not a lap dog. All right, I'm back. So do we have anybody who would like to ask Dr. Cranston any questions?
Looks like there's one in the chat.
Yeah, we've got one in the chat, Manuela.
Perfect. I just saw it pop up. Okay, so community demand is an important, as people are talking about issues, word of mouth.
I'm sorry, Robin, can you help me out here? So you're asking if community demand is as important as people talking about the issue? Is that what I'm hearing? Where's Robin? No, not exactly. Okay, can you help me better understand your question?
And you're welcome to unmute, Robin, if you'd like.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So the community demand, it is important as people are like talking about the issue. I was a little confused by the concept.
Okay. So community demand is one of the most important pieces of the 5 factors of sustained engagement. And essentially, the aim is to have people saying to other community members, right, that what we're doing as a conservation organization with the community is absolutely necessary for the well-being of the community. That's what we're aiming for. That is called, if you have it, if that is happening, then you have community demand. If that is not happening, then there is some work to be done about this. And if you have no idea what your neighbors are saying about the work that the organization that you work for is doing, then that's an important thing to know as well. Does that help, Robin? Okay, great.
We've got a question next from Julia Walls, I think.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for this. This was fantastic. I'm really excited about trying to put some of this stuff into practice, but I'm kind of curious. So if you get to the point where you've handed off stuff to your community participants, you're letting them go on autonomy, but you notice that you need to course correct, like it's not necessarily working. How do you go about doing that without sort of destroying effective autonomy or group efficacy?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Julia. You're from Woodland, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, you are. Okay. Oh, y'all. God bless you. All right. Yes. So this happens a lot, right? The 5 factors, and in fact, I can tell you're also a very much a critical thinker, because this happens a lot where the 5 factors sometimes fight with each other. If you will, right? Like you're going on about your way, creating effective autonomy, letting them do it by themselves without an expert over their shoulder. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, something has gone awry. And so there's a couple things, I wish there was a cut and dry answer for you, right? But the reality is it totally depends on your context, your culture, who you're talking to, and most importantly, who it is that you are to them. Right? Because the power dynamics, the influence dynamics, all of that matters when it comes to how to say things in a way that is not going to damage any of the 5 factors. And so, I mean, there is a reason that Kate and I are working with so many different organizations so intimately. And it is because of this very reason that it's hard for me to give you just a general answer of how you do it across every community. Because it depends on what the community dynamics are, what your dynamic is with the person who's leading the way in the community. So it's really, really important to know that those things can happen, and to have somebody on your team that understands the nuance of how they work together in the specific context that you are working with. And so I would be happy to follow up with you, Julia, after our talk and just hear a little bit more about the context that you're talking about, if it would be helpful. And I'd be happy to chat with you about that.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. I probably have a few more questions, but I'm gonna let everybody else go.
Okay.
Perfect. We can go with Ezekiel. I think you were next.
Hi, thank you. I might be struggling with still how to word my question, but my wonder is, when it comes at the beginning, you mentioned getting people to the table. You had even like provided childcare, which I thought was really interesting. The idea is, where do you like draw that line, I guess? I realize that some of it probably comes down to like the bottom line is money at the end of the day, but because like in Cleveland right now, I'm doing a paper on like Cleveland's tree, like the urban canopy. And like we can bring people trees. Cleveland is giving a ton of people trees, and people won't prune them because it's like too busy with all of life's responsibilities. So it's like, at what point do we say, like, how do you get, like, I guess what's the line, I guess, for bringing people to the table for that incentivizing?
Okay, so I think first of all, I just want to say it's a great question. What is the line? I get asked that a lot of the time, because we ourselves are not social service organizations, right? So the question is, how much do we give? And I want to be clear that these examples I'm giving of childcare, transportation, incentive to come to the table are all based on examples that started for me when I was working in Ferguson, Missouri at St. Louis Zoo, trying to get folks from that area to our community meetings, which we were holding in their community. But still, transportation is a huge thing, right? Childcare is a huge thing for the specific population that we were trying to reach. But these are all things that were specifically and explicitly asked for. So it starts in the relationship building process. When you go to the influencers in your community who know the community or the population that you want to engage, the people that know them the best, right? Going to them and saying, hey, we really want to engage this community, but can you tell us a little bit more about what might get in the way of them coming, right? If we were to hold a focus group, if we were to do a sort of, like, what would keep them from doing it? And they give us answers, and we try to provide support for those barriers to be reduced, right? So it always has to come from them, right? From the people who know them the best, telling us what would be required for these people to be able to show up, right? They might be interested, but if they're not able, then we've got a problem, and you've got the same, right, white rich people at the table, right? Because we can all show up. Yeah. And so, but the other thing I want to ask about the pruning trees thing is, my first question for you would be, did they ask for it? Ezekiel, did they ask for the trees?
Yes, there's an application to do. I'm not on that. I'm just writing a paper about it. It's literally the example that came to mind because I had an interview for it this morning.
Yeah, but, it's a great example.
Yeah, everybody, you have to apply for the tree. What's interesting though is there's no provided education by the coalition that plants the tree. Huh. So like, there's a fact of, like, we have one of the free trees, and no one told me, like, here's how you take care of a tree. Happened to be in a biology master's program where I'm surrounded by people who care about that stuff, so I've learned.
Right.
But,
nobody tells you. Yeah. Whoever's in charge of that program, I mean, the reality is, the level of understanding is that the self-regulated understanding that we talked about. If they make a mistake, can they correct it? That's where we need to get. And if they don't know that, then they probably just send out trees without giving education, like you said, right? Because it's easy enough to just hand out trees, but it takes a lot of resources to do the education piece. So I suppose my answer to your bigger question, Ezekiel, is where's the line? And my answer to that is, what is your goal? Right? What is your goal? Is your goal long-term support from the community of these trees? If so, then there's got to be some education there, right? To the point of that they can correct themselves if they made a mistake. But the reality is that's not the goal, right? If the goal is to just have the tree there and somehow have it taken care of, whether it be by the community member or an outside organization, then maybe you don't need to educate the community. So it totally depends on what the goal is, right? How much education you dole out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I also, that first of going back to the community, like what is their need? And then I like that too a lot. So yeah, thank you very much.
Let's see, looks like we've got a question from Amy Henderson. Amy, would you like to unmute?
Yes, I wanted to say thank you first off. And then it kind of follows a similar question to what was just asked, but it goes into, if you're looking at the stakeholders that you're trying to bring to the table, and there are certain stakeholders that are very reluctant and mistrusting of either the organization you work for or just the or just society in general, how do you go about bringing those type of people or those groups to the table? If you want some context, I can kind of go into that too.
Are you from WPZ as well?
No.
All right. Yeah, give me some context. What are we talking about?
So I'm a GFP student, so Global Field Program. And my inquiry and action project this semester has been about bringing wild horse and burrow stakeholders, specifically professional stakeholders, to the table to discuss management. And one of the big things that I was running into with bringing those stakeholders to the table is a lot of those stakeholders are reluctant to even discuss the topic outside of their group.
Do you know why?
So indigenous tribes are on the table, but they don't want to come because they don't trust the US government. They have been marginalized. So that's been a hard group to even reach. And I've kind of learned some of the reasons why that's a harder group to reach outside of the historical context. But then like even advocacy groups that I've reached out to, they're even reluctant to come to the table because of if what they say gets out to a different advocacy group who has a different opinion, they can have lawsuits come at them. I'm also a federal employee, so then I come from a different perspective too. So
yeah,
that's the type of, like, when it comes to a stakeholder situation along those lines, where it's a very political topic, it's a very emotional topic.
Yeah.
How do you bring stakeholders like that to the table to actually have meaningful discussion?
Yeah, that's a really, really important question. And it's one that I asked early on in my career. And the answer that I got right away was, why are you even there? Like, what? Why do they need to come to your table, right? And so there's that question that we can start with. But we can also answer with a little bit more practicality, which is, from my experience, Amy, the only way into a community that, if we're being honest with ourselves, probably has a lot of good reason to be skeptical about anybody that is coming into the scene that is new, or from a governmental organization or any other organization, right? That's trying to do good in their community, right? There's plenty of examples of this going horribly, horribly wrong for them. So they have good reason. And the only way that I have found it to be successful is if you start by developing relationships with somebody that knows them well, and that can give you some insight as to why, and give you some insight as to what has worked in the past to engage these individuals. The truth is, if they're not going to come to the table, they're not going to come to the table. And, however, if you want a chance to be able to be one of the few groups that gets them, not just to your table, but you have to think about going to theirs. I mean, that's really true, right? The reality is how often have you started a relationship that would allow you to kind of get to the place where you can be invited to their conversations. And to get there, especially when we're talking about First Nations, you have to have an in. You have to have a relationship with somebody on your team needs to have a relationship with somebody on their team. And so that is why literally for the first 6 months of time that I am working with any conservation organization, I am doing interviews, one-on-one or group interviews with current staff at the organization that I'm working with. Not just the core team that I'm working with that are head, but everybody at the organization. I'm reaching out, we're telling people what we're up to. We're asking them if they know of anybody that should absolutely be at the table for this conversation. And the reason we're doing that is multiple fold. One of the folds is that we're trying to build the 5 factors internally as well, which is very important. But the other thing is that we don't already know these people. If we did, we wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be trying to do all of this hard work because we would already have a relationship and they would be helping us to do the thing. But there are people on your team. In our case, you know, if we're working with people who are trying to get individuals around the zoo to get involved, there are people on our staff who were born and raised in that community, or who live there now, or who live there for a long period of time. There's somebody on your team that knows somebody who knows somebody, and you start there. And you also realize that it's going to take a long time. You're not going to first wake up one day and say, I want to engage this community of Indigenous people who have been, you know, marginalized for decades, and I'm gonna end up doing that tomorrow. That's not usually how that works. I hope
Okay,
that's
thank you.
helpful.
That was helpful. Yes.
Okay, great.
All right. So as we're wrapping up, I've been asking this question to our speakers kind of as like the culmination, if you will, but in 1 to 2 sentences, what is, I guess, the key message that we should all take home for all that you taught us today?
I think the key message, I'll just go back to what was on the slide before, which is that we as conservation professionals really need to start thinking about how can we abdicate our throne as leaders of conservation and instead enter a role as a facilitator of these participatory processes that help bring the community goals kind of front and center, dual goals of that plus wildlife conservation or plus conservation goals in general. And to do that, we cannot come into the situation as saviors. Our goal instead is to ask how we can be better neighbors. And that would be what I would leave you all with.
Perfect. Thank you.
And the science supports it, by the way. It's important. Okay.
Of course, the science is always what we,
Right.
you know, we know because it
Right.
tells us these things.
Right.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.